Our topic this month is language learners supporting best practices. We assign this because we want you to be reflective and understand the population and diversity of language learners that you're serving. Here at OSPI, our vision is all students prepared for post-secondary pathways, careers, and civic engagement. And OSPI has developed an equity statement that we think helps frame our webinars. We believe each student, family, and community possesses strengths and cultural knowledge that benefit their peers, educators, and schools. In our leadership role, we examine the ways that current policies and practices result in disparate outcomes for our students and work to intentionally consider historical contexts, ways to partner in decision-making, and ways to dismantle systemic barriers so that students in our schools can access instruction and support in our schools. And this webinar is brought to you through the Office of System and School Improvement. And we wanted to make you aware that we do have a really awesome YouTube channel. We're trying to get 1,000 subscribers by the end of the school year. We hope that you subscribe, and then as we post webinars, you'll get alerts that let you know when they are available. Check out our past webinars. We do have a professional learning theme calendar for the year. Right now we're working on language learners. Next month it's going to be students with disabilities, and so on through the end of the year. So we hope that you can join us each month as we explore some of these topics. This afternoon, Veronica is going to come back with us again. We're super lucky to have her. She's going to be talking about designing research-based programs, and that's going to be this afternoon with Bonnie Zimmerman also. So we hope that you can join us for that as well. Next month, we are going to be working with Tanya May and her staff, looking at implementing and sustaining inclusionary practices and master scheduling. So if you or a friend might be interested in those topics, we really want to encourage you to also participate in those. We have a sister webinar series if you're super into webinars and cannot get enough. The MTSS PLC webinar series is coming up. They've got Karen Ward and using the hexagon tool for selecting new practices this month. Super useful tool. So if you're dipping your toe into MTSS, we really want to encourage you to participate in those as well. For today, our objectives are to check out Washington state level data on language learners, understand some systems level approach for designing language learner services, and we want to get you some resources so that you can get started in your own schools. So who are we? I'm Kefi. I am a Graduation Equity Program Supervisor for OSPI, and today I brought along with me Veronica Gallardo. She is the Director of Migrant and Bilingual Services for OSPI. We're going to start off with a question just to see who's in our audience. We like to be responsive to who we have in front of us.
Good morning, everyone. Again, this is Veronica Gallardo. I am the new director now, 8 months into this position as Director for Migrant and Bilingual Education. Very happy to be here. My background is a former teacher, principal, and director for ELL and International Schools for Seattle Public Schools for the last 10 years. I was also most recently the director for K-12 education for the city of Seattle. And so with my diverse background, it's been a pleasure to be able to bring all those different experiences and hats in service to our student population of language learners. So I look forward to sharing my expertise with you and also learning from all of you as well. We are going to start with the focus on language learners and the importance of focusing on our students who have language learning needs. We want to start with the civil rights obligations, as it's really important to understand what exactly it is that we mean by civil rights obligation. Anyone who receives funding from the Transitional Bilingual Instructional Program really needs to understand that what we are looking for when we discuss civil rights obligations is we want to make sure that folks are identifying English language students and assessing the students within the appropriate timeline. We also want to make sure that there's strong language development services in place with qualified staff. I know many folks have questions about what exactly does qualified staff mean. And what I'm referring to here in particularly is it really depends on two things. One, it depends on your funding source, and two, the available staff that you have in your buildings, right? So the first funding source is if you are using your TBIP funding, which is your state funding for language learning, that requires that you have, as of this last year, 2019, bilingual endorsed or EL endorsed certificated staff. If you're going to fund using TBIP, they must have endorsements. If you are using Title III, you have much more flexibility around how you're paying for your staffing and the fact that professional development can be used through Title III for general education teachers as well. But the other piece is important to know, specifically for rural districts, is that when you are challenged with limited staffing for certificated staff in your district, what we require is that you have an EL endorsed teacher who then guides the instruction and supports through your instructional assistants and then provides services to the students. But it has to be under the guidance of the certificated teacher for instructional assistance. We also want to make sure you have meaningful access for content without unnecessary segregation. So we don't want our students in isolated programs, but we do want them to have access to core content instruction. Program evaluation is often overlooked. People do a great job of looking at their program, trying to design the program, but the importance of the program evaluation is that it's frequent and that it's not just a one-time evaluation process that you look at, and that you want to look at data as well. Language access for parents is critical, and we want to make sure that you understand that when we talk about language access, in most cases, it's your basic ed funds that provide services. Now, when we talk about Title III, which is your federal funding for English language learners, we want to make sure you understand the intent and purposes. And what we mean there is we really want you to understand the importance of the fact that the funding is for making sure that our students attain English language proficiency at high levels of academic achievement, right? We want to make sure that you understand the challenges of the state standards and that we make it accessible for our students. And we also want to make sure that effective language programs are in place, right? So we want to make sure that not only our teachers have the professional development and learning and understanding of how to serve language learners, but it includes your principals, your assistant principals, and other school leaders. And then capacity. We want to make sure that that your principals and teachers not only develop their capacity, but that they really make sure that it's ongoing and frequent. And then parent and family community engagement. Many of our districts do great work around this, where they're promoting their parental and family engagement and community participation. And so we want to encourage you to continue to do that. There's some great work out there that's really taking place. Now, here's the beauty of Washington State. We're shifting. Our population is changing. And so we know that our graduation rate is 62%. With that 62%, we also know that there is an achievement gap because the statewide graduation rate is 80%, right? So while we have increased our graduation rate over time, we still have some work to do. We have 233 different home languages spoken by our students in the state of Washington. And our average time in service, our average years of service for EL students is 3.5 years. And then 29% of our ELs are long-term English language learners. Again, we understand that this is a national issue of having a lot of long-term ELs, but we also have it at the state level, so we need to focus on that as well. So when you're digging deep into your data, and I'll show you how to do that later on, you really want to focus on your long-term ELs and determine what grade levels they're in and what's going on exactly in those areas. Now, the systems level support for language learners, it's really important to understand that when we go out for CPR reviews, this is what we're looking for. We're looking for all these different factors. And right now the team is out there across the state doing those comprehensive program reviews right now. And one of the first things I did was to really dig deep in the previous 2 years of comprehensive program reviews. And what we discovered is that over 60% of the districts are really struggling with program design. That has been a challenge for many districts. And so I am currently having conversations with my team around what exactly is it that we can do to support you and really help you design a comprehensive program that meets the needs of our language learners. I know we all want the same thing, but I want to make sure that my team and I are supporting you in doing that. And with program design being one of the #1 needs, that's what we're going to be working intently on this year. The other area of challenge is around student identification. We have districts that are under-enrolling or not identifying their students as needed as the students come in. As many of us know, our students don't come in at the same time in the year. They come throughout the year. When I was in Seattle Public Schools, for example, we knew that January would have another surge of students. And so we just want to make sure that you're aware of the trends of when your students come into your district and make sure that you're identifying them. And then the program evaluation is another area where I really do want you to listen intently as I go through the presentation today and this afternoon to really understand what exactly we're talking about. Program evaluation really needs to be done multiple times throughout the year and really needs to you need to apply your Tableau data and your diversity report card data to really understand what shifts and adjustments need to take place. When you focus on those three areas, you really will make a difference in how you provide services to language learners. And again, I've looked at all of the examples in the last 2 years of CPR reviews, and that's how I've come to understand that these are your big three priorities to really look at and where my team should prioritize services. So focusing on three big ideas, as I've shared, student identification, right? It's when are the students coming in, making sure we identify them. The program design, which is a really intense process when you're developing your program design. And it's not just a one-time thing, it's multiple times a year. And this afternoon's webinar will really speak in detail and provide examples around what that is. And then the professional development. I know lots of you have been asking questions around what does professional development look like for language learners? What can we do beyond GLAD, beyond other things? And we want to be able to respond and support. We just need a little bit of time to do that. But what we do know is there's some great work out there going on, and I will share that at the end of this presentation. So advice, what advice would I give to schools starting this work? Please, I think it's critical that you start with the data, really understanding what your student population looks like. So when I refer to EL typology, that is really looking at not only the type of language learner you have and the proficiency levels, but how many students are EL and special education? Are you over-identifying EL students in special education? It also means the length and time of program. How long have your EL students been in the EL program? There's a variety of data pieces that you can look at using the Tableau data, which is a real critical starting point. And also, it's important to understand that EL students are general education students first. This is a concept that really can be foreign to some folks, but your EL students are general education students first. And that is a critical understanding to have and to make sure that they're accessing Common Core state standards, right? And then when we talk about EL students being your general education students first, it's really important to talk about the national shift that took place for ELs back in 2014 with the Common Core state standards expectations. We shifted from your technical basic vocabulary and syntax to focus on academic and evidence-based language and core content instruction. So that's a critical piece that I'm really asking you to dig deep into and understand that it's not just about vocabulary and syntax anymore, not with the Common Core state standards. So now with that, you really have to look at evidence-based language instruction and core content instruction together. So Common Core state standards and your English language proficiency standards. And then program evaluation, as I shared earlier, you really need to reflect on the current model that's in place. Does it need adjustments? Are you serving all your EL students? Are you using your data to really determine what exactly, how well and how effective your program is in service to English language learners?
These are the categories from Consolidated Program Review. So where are you most confident and where do you want some support? Thinking about what kind of things you would like. If you could tell us in the chat the kinds of supports you might like. So it looks like student identification, people are pretty confident in. It's like the next runners up are kind of in assessment and staff qualification and professional development. And it looks like program design is actually really high for what people would like support in. So that actually matches up really well with what we're doing today. So let's talk a little bit about supporting best practices.
Supporting best practices is a critical piece of, obviously, for language learners. And what I really wanted to do is really lay it out for non-EL folks to really understand, one, what best practices look like and what the look-fors are when you're in a classroom setting. For the next part of this presentation, I want to introduce my team to you. I want to give you opportunities to really understand what Tableau data you can tap into and access, and then language learner considerations and look-fors, and combining research-based evidence models and giving you an example of a district who's done that very well. So here's the team. So for our bilingual education team, we now have 2 new additional members. Amy started in August. Amy Ingram is our EL program supervisor in Eastern Washington. She is housed in Eastern Washington and is, for anyone who is listening and online, from Eastern Washington. Amy is your person and the contact information is there. Shannon Martin is a recent hire, just a few weeks in, and she is also our program supervisor that is focusing on Western Washington. And Patty, as you all know, has been a great program supervisor for us here in the bilingual education team and is doing great work, and we're very pleased to continue to have her and particularly lead the important work of dual language across the state. We also have our migrant team, and as many of you know, they're a critical team, and 40% of our migrant students are also English language learners. So we do work closely with our migrant team to make sure that our teams work in partnership with each other. Lupe Ledesma is a program supervisor, Sylvia Reina as well. Carlos Gonzalez oversees all of our program IDNR, identification and recruitment. He's a program supervisor as well. And Armando Isias Garcia is a health program supervisor and doing some incredible work with regards to our health programs in higher ed. So what exactly do I mean when I'm talking about what I oversee, Title III and Title IC, and our transitional bilingual instructional program? I definitely identify them as our federal and state program. It's important to know which ones we're talking about. So our TBIP, which is a transitional bilingual instructional program, is our state program that provides over $200 million of funding. There are quite a few districts, as you can see, that have applied for TBIP funding in previous years and continue to do so. The majority of supplemental funding goes to the districts. The primary funding is around staffing, and again, we have to have certificated EL or bilingual staff. Also goes for materials and professional learning. So this is what we mean by our state funding. We also have federal program funding through Title III and Title IC. And the funding is there, as you can see, and we have 155 districts that have applied for Title III funding, and I'd say just about 60 districts that applied for Title IC funding. As a former director in Seattle Public Schools, I really enjoyed the Title III funding because, as you all know, Title III funding has a lot of flexibility around professional development dollars. And while we know that we have EL teachers who serve EL students, you can also use Title III funding for professional development for your general education teachers, because as we know, our EL students are in the classrooms with general education teachers 90% of the time, if not more. So it's one of the critical pieces about that Title III funding is using that funding to make sure your general education teachers have background and experience in language acquisition and development. A few great facts about Washington State, and again, as I mentioned, we're changing pretty rapidly in our population. We are now the second largest migrant student population in the nation, which is very exciting. This year we have surpassed Texas with the migrant student population. You're wondering why? We do believe a lot of the impact is around your H-2A workers and the fact that they are no longer allowed to bring their families into the United States with them. So that is impacting a lot of the border states such as Texas. The question is, can I access TBIP funding for Native students who speak only English? The answer is no. When legislation took place for TBIP funding, that was not one of the language pieces in there that allowed for that. It is something that's being discussed so that we can consider it in the future. But as I'm new to this, I will quickly learn what that process is to see if we can do that. It is a conversation that's taking place right now. For now, the answer is no. So numbers, again, so last year's average was 134,693 English language learners, seventh largest EL population in the nation as well for ELs. So as you can see, our numbers are healthy and doing very well. Now, program models and look-first for language learning. This is where we talk about your foundation. And again, as I'm presenting this, this is with the understanding that many of you do not have the EL background. This afternoon's presentation will be more around EL practitioners and what that looks like. But this is more of a high level, if you don't have an EL background, what you should be designing for a model and what you should be looking for. So when we talk about program models, we are talking about two specific categories. We're talking about your bilingual programs, which are your dual language, and your alternative programs, with the understanding that both are serving English language proficiency. And when we go across the state for those CPR reviews, we are looking at what exactly do we have in place, not only with your model, which students are you serving, what's your language of instruction, is it English and primary language, is it strictly English?
What's your model look like? Is it a 50-50, a 90-10? We're looking for your teacher qualifications. We're looking for the ultimate goal of your model and the typical length of time for your program that you're providing services for your English language learners. So this is a beautiful snapshot that really gives you an example of when we say what program model are you providing services in, this is an example of that. Are we expecting you to do all of them? Absolutely not, we understand. And particularly for rural districts, we understand you can't do that all. But we certainly want to know which one you are providing. So if you have a CPR review coming up, please take a look at this program model and use this as a reference. Factors of language acquisition. I really wanted to take the opportunity to talk about student-centered factors, right? Not only are we talking academic, but there are other factors that we need to consider, particularly when we're talking about acquisition. So we need to consider aptitude, age of language acquisition, first language, prior education, the affective filter, instruction, motivation and attitude, family support, personality, hearing, and vision. So when you are looking at the academic parts, you also need to consider all these other areas as well for factors of language acquisition. The 6 stages of language acquisition, I really want to emphasize that these are not your proficiency levels. This is the research around 6 stages of acquisition, where research shows you have a pre-production, an early production, all the way to the advanced fluency area. What I really want to stress here is that along that path of 1 through 6, right, of the 6 stages of acquisition, our students come in with different varying abilities of speaking. We know that the pre-production, for example, is it's what we call the silent phase. So as a student comes into your school setting, we really want you to have an understanding that there are 6 stages of language acquisition and that our language learners do not come in a one-size-fits-all. There is a beautiful diversity of language acquisition our students bring with them. Now, this is important. I really appreciate the support from Dr. Joan Johnston-Nielsen. She's just been great in allowing me to share this 3 pages of documents here, because it really, what we would call our look-fors. So for a student who is emerging, which is your proficiency levels of 1 and 2, here is what you would expect to see in a classroom setting and looking for teachers to focus on during the instruction time. We're looking for established predictable routines. You're looking for provide opportunities to interact with peers. And I want to emphasize that when we talk about interacting with peers, at the middle school and high school level, you really need to be intentional around that, because often that is something that's not considered, right? We need our students to have opportunities to interact and engage. I also want to emphasize visual supports. Those are great and very helpful for students. You need to provide concrete language experiences relevant to students' abilities and interests. We expect progress in English language. We need to make sure our students are making progress, which means that you need to do informal and formal assessments throughout the quarter or semester that you're providing service students. And then while we say don't worry about being on grade level, we do want you to understand that they need to be working in grade level material. The role of the English language learner and our teacher and the general education teacher is to make sure that they are providing bridges so that students can access the grade level core content. So if for a student who is progressing at a level 3, the teacher really should be providing opportunities for shared guided reading. So this is different from the previous page, right? So this is, we've upped it a notch here where we're saying, yes, provide the opportunities, but now you want to also provide shared guided reading opportunities. You want to encourage active participation in small groups where there is some safety in the students engaging and interacting with each other. You want guided writing activities as well. And you want to provide, again, the concrete language experiences, as well as we want to still make sure that you're doing those informal assessments on a frequent basis, and then making sure you're providing access to core content instruction. Level 4, which is your early advanced for our students, we want our teachers to make sure that they're providing instruction on text features to encourage independent learning. We're shifting from guided to independent. We want to encourage leadership in small group activities. And we say the small group because we want it to be safe, and we want to encourage the students to participate as well as lead. We want to focus on academic discourse. We've got a lot of research from Jeffrey Zweers, Guadalupe Valdez, and quite a few folks that talk about the importance and need around academic discourse. There's great resources out there that can provide that. You want to provide a variety of multi-level and multimedia resources in content areas as well. We want to be able to make sure our students can access the materials through multi-level and multimedia resources. So now I'm going to get into the Tableau data. This is where we really dig deep into what's available in Tableau, specific to your EL students. Now, here is specific instructions on how you access the public Tableau. So there's two things here. So there's the public Tableau, but if you want to go into EDS and get the student level Tableau data, you would have to do that through EDS. So the arrows and the square boxes below will explain that. Your first step is to visit the Migrant Bilingual page to get to the link. Then you go into TBIP for student groups, and that's where you go in to get into the public Tableau. If you want to go deeper, again, you log into EDS, and that gives you the per student data. Public is more of your high level summative information, and the EDS is your per student data that can break it down by student within a school setting or even at the district level, higher level. When you get into the Tableau, and this is the public one, the important part to focus on here is that very narrow column at the top, just below the blue line, and it starts with ELPA 21 pass rate. Those tabs are all the different data points that you can tap into that's specific to your EL student population. The beauty of this is that you can look at your ELPA 21 pass rates, you can look at how many different home languages your students speak, you can look at the primary languages, the program length, and program models. There's a variety of resources here that are available. The other piece that I think is critical is this page, where it also helps you identify if you are over-identifying your EL student population. So if you go to Tableau by student group and you click on this page, it will show you your high cap, as you can see in the fourth column over. It'll show you your low income, it'll show your migrant students, your 504 students. It'll also show your EL students who are special education students. That has been really telling when I go across the state and meet with districts, because it can tell you by grade level the over-identification of EL students in special education. A really rich page here of data that can support each school district. Here is an example of the public Tableau in program length. What you see here is the third column over at the grade level. Then you have your average enrollment length and time. And what we focus on at the state level is your median enrollment length and time. So if you look, it just seems like there's a kind of a protrusion by the time you get to fourth grade, which is at 5 years. And in fifth grade, it's 6 years. And in sixth grade, it's 7, and so on. If you remember in the earlier pages, we know that the average length of time for an EL student in a program is 4. So if we have students that are 6, 7 years in program, then it's just an opportunity for us to have a question or conversation with you all to say, hey, what's going on here? Let's unpack this. Let's really look at this data deeply to figure out why we have students in the program for so long. And I know this feels like a lot, but this is really great and easy data to access. It's just opportunities for conversation. Here is something I have found ESD is very interested in. And so when I go across the state and have conversations, it's around percentage of long-term ELs. And what I do is I put an ESD with all the districts that they serve in that district name column. Then I give them the per student count of EL students, and then the number of long-term EL students and the percentage of long-term ELs. That percentage of long-term ELs shows districts that have, in particular, as you get to the lower end of the document, the ones that really have some work to do with the length of time that the students are in their programs, right? And often, I'd say over 90% of the time, we're talking about high school student populations. Now, what I want to share here is I've given you the federal and state information. I've introduced my team to you, and I've given you look-fors. But I also wanted to share that there is great work out there across the state, and I really appreciate all of you who are working very hard to do this. But I wanted to give you an example of a school within a district that is really closing their gap, and they're doing it by incorporating research into their MTSS program school-wide. So as you can see, their research approach is act, plan, study, do. Many of you know that through the Carnegie Foundation as a research approach. They've applied this research approach in their MTSS model throughout the entire building. And as a result, in Kent, we have the Martin Sorton Elementary School who received the MTSS award for high diversity and one of the lowest rates of EL special education students. They've reduced the achievement gap by 3% and the over-identification of EL students in special education. And one, it's because they have a research-based approach, right? They're applying it to MTSS, and everyone in their building has received professional development around exactly what they're doing. Really important examples here of success. And I know there's many more out there, so kudos to you all again for doing that important work. And I want to close with, why do we do what we do? Because we have amazing children that we are trying to support. And I know we are all doing this on behalf of the students, and I thank you. So the over-identification of students is in EL and special education. It's not over-identifying EL students in general, because you're right, we have the language assessment that language learners take in the state. But when I'm talking about over-identification, it's EL students in special education. So for example, I went to a district in Eastern Washington, and in that district, we used that Tableau data. And in that Tableau data, we saw that there was, I'd say, an 11% 8th grade population that were identified as special education students. But when you looked at your EL students in special education, it was 21% of the student population in that grade level that were EL and special education. So that gap is what we mean by the over-identification of EL students in special education.
So we do want to share with you a couple of resources. And Veronica, do you want to talk a little bit about what these are? These were the ones that you put forward for us.
So looking into our district, our state websites, and the school apportionment funding is really some amazing information around what is it exactly that your district gets regarding funding of all your program, your alternative programs, and not just EL funding. So if you're curious about how much money you get from Title 1C, Title III, your TBIP, you go to the school apportionment page on our website. The other great tools are the report card, which is the diversity report card. That is a beautiful set of data that's specific to program design. So if you want to look for EL students and have summative information by your district or by your school, diversity report card is where you want to go. And I explained the TBIP. The other piece is the federal EL toolkit. The federal program, the Office of English Language Acquisition at the federal department in DC, created amazing toolkits that have really great resources and references that you can constantly refer to if you have specific questions around federal requirements. We also have the English Language Arts menu of best practices. And then, of course, on our website, you have your program guidelines from us that give very specific details as to what we do and why we do it. So we are currently under conversation with our state superintendent. Actually, I am, along with my assistant superintendent. An announcement regarding WIDA and ELPA 21 should be coming sometime at the end of March. Still having deep conversations and looking into it right now. We understand there is a high interest in that.
Another resource is, of course, to contact me or Veronica, and we can hook you up with the right people. Thank you for joining us today. We love to get in contact. You can follow us on the OSPI YouTube channel, and all of our images come from Creative Commons or are from the Noun Project. We have a couple of discussion questions for you, and as you kind of close your ideas and reflect on the webinar today, what were some big ideas that you got? What are your next leadership moves? What do you value in the presentation? And what questions do you still have? Tell us about them. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you this afternoon.
So we actually don't have an alternative assessment for students who are in ELL and special education. We use the WIDA ALT alternative assessment that we find to be far more reflective of a student's needs. So with that, it's a great assessment. We've had great feedback as to the use of it and how it applies to students. We also know that the over-identification of EL students and special education students is a national issue as well.